Hello and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. State and city officials are suing the Trump administration in an effort to stop the deployment of military troops in Illinois. The lawsuit calls the looming deployment of 400 Texas National Guard members and another 300 from Illinois a politically motivated and unconstitutional federal overreach. Here's Governor J.B. Pritzker earlier today.
I have called upon Governor Abbott to immediately withdraw his support for this decision and refuse to allow Texas National Guard members to be used in this way. Let me be clear. Donald Trump is using our service members as political props and as pawns in his illegal effort to militarize our nation's cities.
Attorneys for the Trump administration say the troops from Texas could hit the streets of Chicago as soon as tomorrow. The administration says the troops are being deployed to protect federal property amid ongoing protests against ramped up immigration enforcement. A federal judge today declined to immediately block the deployment, but instead scheduled a full hearing on Thursday. Joining us now is Mayor Brandon Johnson. Mayor, welcome back. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So the Texas troops that we mentioned, they would work alongside the 300 Illinois troops, Illinois National Guard members, if this deployment comes to fruition. Mayor, what do you say to the residents who are scared about this? What advice do you give them?
Well, first of all, this is illegal and dangerous. You know, what the President of the United States of America is doing in cities across America is unconscionable. And it's with one thing in mind. It's to foment fear and to ensure that, you know, his presidency is protected with the interest of those who essentially have secured his presidency, which is the ultra rich, right? And what we've said from the very beginning, that this has always been the goal of this administration, right? To use the federal agents as a pretext to essentially to sic the National Guard on the residents of our city, which their ultimate goal is to militarize our cities and to fully occupy them. In no way are we going to accept this, and we've made this point emphatically clear, that the city of Chicago does not need a militarized force occupying our city.
In the meantime, what do you say to residents who think this could be going down in the next couple of days?
Well, know that I'm standing up and I'm fighting to protect the residents of this city. I've signed now 3 sweeping executive orders to do just that. And look, I'm going to use every single tool that's available to me to ensure that the residents of our city are protected. But it's going to take the people of this city and people across the country to continue to organize on the ground and actually hold this administration accountable. What I'm grateful for is that we have a very strong resolve here in Chicago and throughout the state of Illinois, where we recognize that these unconstitutional acts that are being carried out by the President of the United States of America, we're not going to tolerate it in Chicago, and we're going to do everything in our power to push back against what he has essentially declared, which is a war on Chicago.
So one of those executive orders you signed today, creating an ICE-free zone. It would prohibit federal immigration agents from using any city-owned property in their ongoing operations in Chicago. The order also says, quote, city departments and agencies are directed to implement this order within 5 days. This could include, but is not limited to, ensuring that wherever possible, physical barriers such as locked gates are used to limit access to city property for the purpose of federal immigration enforcement. Can the city truly enforce this order, or is this largely symbolic?
We most certainly will. And if the federal government violates this local ordinance, we're going to use every single tool that's available to hold them accountable, and that includes the courts. Here's the bottom line. School parking lots should not be used for federal agents, particularly ICE, to prepare its weapons to be shoved in the face of black and brown people. Our parks should not be used as a place where federal agents are using this as a staging location to disappear people. What's happening in this country right now is a threat to our democracy, and if the Congress or the Supreme Court, if they're not going to hold this administration accountable, Chicago will.
So you're saying you can use the courts. So, for example, if an ICE agent should violate this executive order, is the most that you can do take them to court? Because certainly CPD officers cannot either get in the way of, or certainly not arrest an ICE agent.
We're going to use every single tool that's available to me, and that includes the courts. Look, here's the bottom line. We don't want a federalized occupation in our city. And because this president is not being held accountable by Congress, the city of Chicago will. And what this executive order lays out in very clear and direct terms, that using public spaces to stage ICE raids, we're not going to accept it, we're not going to tolerate it, and we're going to stand firm as a city.
So, of course, we mentioned the state of Illinois and your administration. You all are suing the Trump administration to block the deployment of troops. This afternoon, a federal judge declined to immediately block that deployment. We'll all be watching on Thursday when that hearing is scheduled. Why do you believe the federal government can't legally deploy troops to Chicago with the intent of protecting ICE?
Well, I mean, look, I mean, this is, clearly an overreach by the President of the United States of America to federalize the National Guard, particularly using this idea of a state of an emergency. He has not met the minimal qualifications to do such a thing. And in fact, quite frankly, I don't believe and know of any National Guard members that have signed up to serve and protect our democracy, did that with being used as a political ploy to essentially be forced into being in communities that, quite frankly, are not asking for this type of deployment, right? So what is clear here is, though, that we saw this in Portland and in Oregon, where a federal judge has already declared that what this president is attempting to do is unconstitutional, and the expectation is that the courts hold up that position across the country.
So 2 Chicagoans were charged over the weekend after ramming a Border Patrol vehicle in Brighton Park. That was on Saturday. Here's Police Superintendent Larry Snelling talking about this incident, talking about it today. The incident happened this weekend on the Southwest side.
When you plow into a vehicle that contains law enforcement agents, you're using deadly force. And they can use deadly force in response to stop you. You may not like what they're doing. I can understand that there's a lot of emotions out there, but that does not mean that you get to commit a crime.
Mayor, you said this morning that you don't believe the federal officials' account of what happened. What do you think actually happened?
Well, we saw this in Franklin Park, right, where a father was shot and killed by a federal agent. This federal agent described the situation that he believed justified his action. Now, it later turned out that even this federal agent said this was not a major issue. And so we can't believe anything that comes from the Trump administration. And so that's why it's incumbent upon us is to make sure that we are putting protective measures in place to ensure that the constitutional right to peacefully assemble, that's protected, but also to make sure that our local law enforcement is able to do its job, which is to keep the peace, to keep calm. What's unfortunate in all of this is that the President of the United States of America is placing our local law enforcement in impossible situations.
Have you or Superintendent Snelling, have you all sought from DHS any additional information or investigation to confirm the facts of that shooting over the weekend?
Well, we certainly are calling for an investigation. I've been the first person to call for an independent investigation, that the Department of Justice should ensure that if we're going to make sure that there is trust between law enforcement and residents, and we can't have a situation where federal agents are shooting and killing the people of this city or within our county or our state or our country. This is really an escalation by the President of the United States of America, the way he is using his personal militarized force, ICE, to essentially create fear and intimidation. But we're not going to be intimidated in Chicago.
So Broadview Mayor Katrina Thompson is implementing limited protest hours there from 9 to 6 p.m., 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. in efforts to sort of curb some of the clashes that keep happening between protesters and federal agents there in her community. And this is just the latest restriction on protest in Broadview that have been criticized as sort of helping federal agents deport and detain Chicagoans. Have officials struck the right balance between protecting people but also allowing them to exercise their First Amendment rights?
Well, look, I think all of us are doing our very best to make sure that we are keeping calm and that we're protecting the fundamental rights of all of our residents. But what we are experiencing right now, it's an unprecedented overreach by the federal government. We're talking about federal agents shooting pepper balls at people who are peacefully protesting. I mean, even a journalist was shot at. Just over the weekend, federal agents released tear gas on our local police department. This is a clear escalation on the part of the President of the United States of America with the ultimate goal, which is to militarize our streets by sending military troops in our city. He said it himself that he wants to use the cities across America as training ground for the military.
Well, and to sort of to that point, we keep hearing from both Governor Pritzker as well as yourself words like Trump's invasion, Governor Pritzker using the word thuggery, creating a war zone. You mentioned, I think just this morning, that the president wants to recreate the Civil War. Do you think all of that language lowers the temperature at all? Is that not using the same incendiary language that we hear from the president?
Yeah, telling the truth on this president and his overreach of the Constitution, that's what this moment calls for. We're talking about making sure that the people of our country are not being used as justification and rationale for this president's ideology. Here's the fact of the matter is, the president has described the people of this country as enemies from within. This is not about the recreation of a war. This is about him actually declaring war on American cities. He's done it. It's my responsibility to stand up to tyranny and to make sure that we are defending the people of this city. And I will use every single tool available to me to ensure that we are protecting all of our residents.
Is responding with the same language toolful? Is that a tool that you can use?
I wouldn't describe what our defense is as the same language. I've never referred to the president as an enemy. We've simply said that he is overreaching with the Constitution. Look, this is not about how we are responding. This is about what we are responding to. The President of the United States of America has declared war on the city of Chicago. Those are his words. I'm simply doing everything in my power to protect the people of this city. The President intentionally is using his militarized private security as a way for a pretext to send troops into cities across America. He said that, and we're not going to stand for that in Chicago.
He has referenced some Chicagoans, the president has referenced some Chicagoans who he says would welcome the troops. Here's a bit of that.
So you have black women with MAGA hats on in Chicago, all over the place. They want the guard to come in, or they don't care who comes in. They just want to be safe. And they really don't care. You know, there was one woman, she was great today. She said, you know what? I don't care if it's the National Guard, the Army, the Marines, the Air Force. I don't care who comes in as long as we're safe. And that's the way most of the public feels. We're going to make Chicago really great again.
Make Chicago great again. What do you say to the residents who might want the National Guard deployment?
This past summer, we had the fewest amount of homicides in the city of Chicago since 1965. The safest summer in 60 years. Now look, there's more work to be done, but we are driving violence down in the city of Chicago. This is not about deportation, and it's not about public safety, because if it were, why did the president cut the ATF budget by 30%? Why did he take $800 million out of the budget that went towards violence prevention? Why is he cutting off food and access to health care, defunding our public education system? I mean, he's literally charging the Chicago Public Schools for actually making sure that our black students are successful. This president is not serious about driving violence down in cities across America. If he were, he would work with me and local law enforcement to get illegal weapons off the street that are being shipped to the city of Chicago from red states that voted for him. That's why I'm working hard every single day to invest in young people, invest in mental health services, invest in more affordable homes, investing in our public education system to ultimately drive violence down in the city of Chicago. One homicide, one shooting, one act of violence is one too many, but we are clearly moving in the right direction.
So you mentioned CPS. I want to come back to that, but first we have to talk about the city budget. We have to talk about the money, Mayor. Your office's financial forecast shows a $1.15 billion budget gap, the largest in over a decade. How can you fill that gap without a property tax increase?
Yeah, well, first of all, let's talk about how we got here. Problem is that for multiple administrations, they didn't pay into our pensions, right? And they've kicked the can down the road, and now we're at the end of it. And I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that we repair the structural damage that I inherited, and we're going to do that. And we're going to do that by making sure that we find government productivity and find ways in which we can streamline government so that we're not experiencing leakage. But we also have to challenge those with means to put more skin in the game. I'm going to give a budget address in a few more days next week. And I'm going to make sure that we are challenging corporations and the ultra-rich to pay their fair share. Why is that important? Donald Trump just provided a tax break for the wealthiest people in the entire country. In fact, what he did was he provided the greatest concentration of wealth into the hands of the ultra-rich than any other president in the history of our lifetime. And so that's why I'm going to balance this budget. We're going to make sure that we're investing in people, but we have to respond to the negligence over the course of decades where we did not pay into our pension system, and I'm going to course correct that.
So the budget task force that you announced earlier this year just came back within the last month or so with its preliminary report recommending an automatic annual property tax hike tied to inflation, among some other recommendations that they made. If this task force that you assembled is recommending it, why keep property taxes off the table?
Well, they've recommended a lot of things. I don't have to necessarily accept all of them. And I appreciate the hard work of these individuals. We brought together business leaders, labor leaders, elected leaders, community-based organization leaders, and there are some recommendations that they have put forth that I believe we should explore. But I'm not going to propose a property tax increase in my budget proposal. But I am going to challenge those with means and the ultra-rich to put more skin in the game.
So we both mentioned that they made several recommendations. What other of those recommendations can you get behind?
Well, we're looking at all of them. I mean, you're going to have to stay tuned. I'll give that presentation next week. But
You
what I
can give it now if you want.
I mean, I could. Well, here's the thing. We have located a number of ways in which government could be far more productive, right? There's some duplicatives of areas where we can streamline the process so that, again, we're not leaking dollars. But I want to make sure we're very clear about this. We have actually cut spending over the course of several years. In fact, government is smaller than what it was just 10 years ago, right? So what the report also indicated is that we don't have a spending problem in Chicago. We have a revenue challenge, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to course correct, going to find progressive revenue to make sure that we're balancing this budget, and we're not doing it off the backs of working people. But it also is going to challenge us to make sure that Springfield does its part as well. Springfield is going to have to roll its sleeves up, and I'm willing to do that and throw down with anybody who's interested to make sure that we're getting our fair share from Springfield. But we know that budgets are challenged across America. Springfield just had a $3.1 billion budget deficit that they had to course correct. I'm working hard every single day to bring back resources to invest in our public transportation system, and I'm going to do that. But we also have to challenge Springfield to tax, quite frankly, the ultra-rich. The people of Chicago want it, the people of the state of Illinois want it, and quite frankly, if we're going to protect ourselves from the Trump taxes, we're going to have to challenge those with means to put more skin in the game.
So you've emphasized progressive revenue ideas before, including, as you say, making the wealthy pay their fair share or exploring corporate contributions. Mm-hmm. Would you be willing to reimpose the so-called head tax, that $4 per employee on big companies?
Well, we're certainly going to look at it, right? This was a part of the recommendation that we saw with our working groups, but here's the most important thing. That if we're going to continue to build the safest, most affordable big city in America, which we are, crime is down, our investments are up. You just saw last week that our summer economic prowess was incredibly strong, almost $900 million in revenue, $20 billion plus in terms of overall impact because of tourism. Hotel occupancy is up. Our airports are vibrant. O'Hare literally breaking and setting records every single day. We have just about to break ground eventually with the project for the new Chicago Fire Stadium, Southeast Side, Cy Quantum. We broke ground there. There's a $300 million hospital that's coming to the South Side. We have the 1901 project on the West Side. So what I'm saying is that there's real economic development that's happening in the city of Chicago, while at the same time driving violence down. If we're going to build the safest, most affordable big city in America, the ultra-rich and our corporations are going to have to put more skin in the game.
As you mentioned, you're unveiling your 2026 budget proposal next week. Given that Chicago, though, is ending the current fiscal year with that $146 million deficit, will the city be able to close this year's current deficit without raiding the rainy day fund or dipping into the reserves?
Well, that's what my budget proposal is going to entail. Look, we've had challenges over the course of decades in this city. And again, because of the fact that we didn't pay into our pensions, and mayors prior used what should have gone towards retirement, as their personal slush fund to fatten the pockets of their political benefactors. We're not doing that anymore. We're going to balance this budget, not on the backs of working people. We're going to handle our obligations, but we're also going to make sure that we're making the critical investments to build a safe and affordable big city.
So stay tuned for next week, then, is what you're saying.
You'll be there. You'll be there.
Somebody's going to be there. So pivoting to CPS, because you mentioned the Department of Education withholding nearly $6 million from Chicago Public Schools over both its Black Student Success Plan as well as protections for transgender students. Has your administration or the district considered suing the Trump administration to get that money back?
We have, and my administration will work with the Chicago Public Schools to do just that. In fact, it's just $6 million this year, but over the life of what this opportunity would entail for our Black students, we're talking about almost $18 million. And here's the thing, we're talking about making sure that our Black students are successful. Why would anyone want to attack, such an investment? It's why this president is just unfit.
Well, and this administration argues that their reasoning for doing that is because we should be making all students successful, not just spending money and time dedicated to the Black students.
Yeah, investing in people who have historically been, unfortunately, on the other end of disinvestment, that's the right thing to do. We're talking about a city where we had the largest school closings in the history of Chicago, where public housing has been shut out, where jobs have been lost and privatized. And so if we're going to make the wrongs right, we have to do the real work to ensure to do that. And there's nothing wrong with investing in the very people, quite frankly, who have been at the brunt of poor policy over the course of decades.
When CPS passed its own budget, the city's pension reimbursement, of course, was a sticking point. Do you have work to do in Springfield to pass a law about this during the fall session?
Well, look, we're moving towards a fully elected representative school board. And so the school board it's going to be treated like every other school board across this state. And so, yes, we're going to have laws in place to disentangle the relationship between CPS and the city of Chicago so that this body of government can stand on its own.
The CPS budget, of course, does not include an option for new borrowing, so accruing new debts, I think the board would have to make a decision on that at the time. But do you think that any new borrowing that the district does, should it also include enough to cover that pension payment that has been a point of contention?
Look, our schools are woefully underfunded across the state of Illinois. There's a brand new funding formula where the
7
funding
years
formula,
new.
Right?
So it's more than 7, actually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That made it very clear of what the city of Chicago is owed. Here's the thing. If the state of Illinois provided 12% of what the city is actually owed, we would have a $500 million surplus right now. So this is something that can actually be corrected. That's why I'm prepared to roll up my sleeves and work with the General Assembly as well as the governor to make sure that whether it's District 299 or East St. Louis or Rockford or anywhere else in this state, that the people of this state receive a high quality education. Now here's the thing, the vast majority of Illinoisans actually agree with me. I believe 70% have made it very clear that we're underfunding our schools across the state of Illinois. We have to do better.
Okay, so real quick, the Bears, before we let you go, because we're almost out of time, they seem to be moving ahead in Arlington Heights. If things should stall in Springfield in terms of getting public money for development in Arlington Heights, would you encourage the Bears to stay at Soldier Field and or re-engage in stadium talks?
Well, look, there's only one place for the Chicago Bears, and it's Chicago. The bottom line is this, I had a conversation with Joe Mansueto just a few months ago, and we got a deal done.
Chicago Fire Club.
Chicago Fire, exactly. Mm-hmm. So, I would encourage, all of our sports teams to remain engaged with the economic prowess of the city of Chicago. After all, it is the greatest city in the world.
Okay. Do you think public funds, money from Chicago taxpayers, should be used to keep the Bears in town?
Well, look, I've said this from the very beginning. The teams have to put skin in the game. And to the Bears' credit, they were willing to do that. Now, there is, a revenue source through ISFA that is designed to build stadiums. Now, look, if we're not going to use those dollars to build stadiums because that's their only use, then we should have a larger conversation about making sure that the city of Chicago can actually control those dollars and resources, and then we can make those investments as we see fit.
Okay, we'll talk more about that next time. Mayor Brandon Johnson, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Go Cubs.
Go Cubs. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Monday night. Join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and a special time, 10:30. The Trump administration moves to withhold federal funding for Chicago's Red Line extension. What that could mean for the future of the massive infrastructure project. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports inclusionary excellence throughout the legal profession.